The tear rolled down Victoria Reed's cheek before she could stop it, splashing onto the weathered wooden platform of the Raton, New Mexico Territory train station. It was May 1885, and she'd traveled over 1,000 miles only to be rejected within an hour of her arrival. The man who'd sent for her, her supposed future husband, had taken one look at her reddened eyes and trembling chin before declaring her too emotional for frontier life. Victoria stood alone now, her single trunk beside her, watching the retreating back of Bartholomew Fletcher disappear into the dusty street. He hadn't even offered her a meal or a place to stay for the night before deciding she wasn't the stoic, unfeeling workhorse he'd apparently expected. "You're crying already," he had sneered, his own face a mask of disgust as Victoria had tried to discreetly wipe away tears of exhaustion and relief after the grueling journey. What kind of woman breaks down at the slightest inconvenience? No, this won't do at all. I need someone sturdy, not some weepy eastern flower who'll wilt at the first sign of hardship. His words still stung as Victoria contemplated her dire situation. The sun was setting over the distant mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. The station was emptying quickly, the last passengers from the eastbound train having long since departed with their waiting families or business associates. She had exactly $27 to her name, a trunk full of modest belongings, and not a single acquaintance in the entire New Mexico Territory. The return train to St. Louis wouldn't arrive for 3 days, and Victoria had no idea where she would stay until then, or if her meager funds would even cover the return fare. "Miss, you look like you could use some help." The voice startled her. Victoria turned to find a tall man regarding her with concerned blue eyes. He wore dusty range-clothed sturdy denims, a simple cotton shirt, and a well-worn hat that he promptly removed upon addressing her. His sun-bronzed face was kind, if weathered, and he stood with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. Unlike Bartholomew Fletcher's pinched, judgmental expression, this stranger's face held nothing but gentle inquiry. "I'm quite all right," Victoria lied, straightening her shoulders despite the heaviness in her heart. The man glanced at her trunk, then back to her face, his expression indicating he didn't believe her for a second. "Begging your pardon, madam, but you don't look all right, and it's getting dark. Raton's not the kind of place for a lady to be alone after sundown." Victoria hesitated. Her mother's warnings about strange men echoed in her mind, but there was something trustworthy about this one's direct gaze. Besides, what choice did she have? "I'm afraid I find myself in an unexpected predicament," she admitted, struggling to maintain her composure. "I was to be married, but the gentleman has changed his mind." Understanding dawned in the man's eyes. "Mail order situation?" he asked gently. Victoria nodded, mortified. "I'm Nathan Irwin," he said, extending a calloused hand. "I ranch about 15 miles outside of town. And if you don't mind me saying so, any man who'd leave a lady stranded at a train station isn't worth the dirt under his boots." Despite everything, Victoria found herself smiling faintly at his blunt assessment. "Victoria Reid," she replied, briefly touching his hand in greeting. "And thank you for your kindness, Mr. Irwin, but I wouldn't want to impose." "No imposition," Nathan said firmly. "My sister runs the boarding house just down the street. Decent place, clean rooms. I can take you there, make sure you get settled proper." Victoria felt another treacherous tear threatening to spill. She blinked rapidly, determined not to prove Mr. Fletcher right about her excessive emotions. Nathan noticed. His expression softened further. "You know," he said quietly, "my ma always told me tears mean you're human. Nothing to be ashamed of there. The simple kindness of his words undid her. Victoria pressed her handkerchief to her mouth as a sob escaped. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "It's just been a very long journey, and now you need a hot meal and a safe place to sleep," Nathan finished for her. "And tomorrow, things will look clearer. They always do." He bent to pick up her trunk with ease. "If you'll allow me, Miss Reed," Victoria nodded gratefully, gathering her composure. As they walked down Raton's main street in the fading light, she felt the weight of the day's disappointment lightened somewhat by the unexpected kindness of a stranger. Nathan's sister, Sarah Irwin Thornton, proved to be as warm and welcoming as her brother. The boarding house was modest but immaculately kept, with clean pine floors and simple furnishings. After hearing Victoria's situation, Sarah insisted on offering her a room at half the usual rate. "Just until you decide what's next," Sarah said firmly, waving away Victoria's protests. "We women have to look out for each other out here." That night, in the small but comfortable room with its narrow bed and patchwork quilt, Victoria allowed herself to properly weep. For her lost dreams, for the home she'd left behind in Connecticut, for the humiliation of being deemed unsuitable within moments of arrival. When she finally drifted to sleep, it was with the strange comfort of Nathan Irwin's words echoing in her mind. "Tears mean you're human." The next morning brought renewed determination. Victoria had never been one to wallow in self-pity for long, and after a hearty breakfast in the boarding house dining room, she sought out Sarah to inquire about employment opportunities in Raton. "Well now, that depends on your skills," Sarah said, refilling Victoria's coffee cup. The dining room was empty save for them, the other boarders having already departed for their day's work. "Can you teach?" Victoria shook her head. "I have no formal training. In Connecticut, I worked as a seamstress in my father's tailor shop until he passed last year." Sarah brightened. "A seamstress? Now that's useful. Mrs. Holloway at the dress shop is forever complaining she can't keep up with the mending, let alone the new orders. You think she might hire me?" Victoria asked, hope rising. "Worth asking," Sarah nodded. "And if not her, there's always need for someone who can handle a needle proper. Not many women out here have the time or talent for fine sewing." A knock at the boarding house door interrupted their conversation. Sarah rose to answer it, returning moments later with Nathan in tow. He removed his hat upon seeing Victoria, revealing dark hair in need of a trim. "Morning, Miss Reed," he greeted her. "Thought I'd check in, see how you're settling." Victoria felt an unexpected warmth in her chest at his consideration. "Very well, thanks to your sister's kindness. We were just discussing potential employment in town." "Victoria's a trained seamstress," Sarah explained to her brother. "I suggested Mrs. Holloway's shop." Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "Good idea, though." He hesitated, then seemed to make up his mind. "I actually came to make an offer if you're interested, Miss Reed." Victoria raised an eyebrow in question. "My ranch is doing well enough, but the house." He looked almost embarrassed. "It needs a woman's touch, truth be told. I've been meaning to hire someone to make curtains, proper bedding, that sort of thing. Been putting it off because there's not many out here with the skills. If you're looking for work, I'd pay fair for your time and talents." Sarah was watching her brother with a curious expression that Victoria couldn't quite interpret. "That's very kind," Victoria said carefully, "but I couldn't possibly travel out to your ranch unchaperoned. It wouldn't be proper." "Of course not," Nathan agreed immediately. "I thought maybe you could stay here, work on the items in town. I'd provide all the materials, pay for your room and board while you worked, plus wages." It was a generous offer, and Victoria found herself tempted. It would give her time to consider her next steps without the immediate pressure of finances. "I'd need to see the house first," she said thoughtfully. "To measure for curtains and such." "Sarah could accompany you," Nathan suggested. "We could ride out tomorrow, be back by supper." Victoria looked to Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "I haven't been out to Nathan's place in months. Be nice to see what he's done with it." "Then I accept, Mr. Irwin," Victoria said with a smile, "at least for the assessment visit." The following day dawned clear and bright. Nathan arrived at the boarding house with a wagon rather than horses, a consideration for which Victoria was silently grateful. Though she'd ridden in her youth, it had been many years since she'd been on horseback. The journey to Nathan's ranch took nearly 3 hours, but Victoria hardly noticed the time passing. The landscape of northern New Mexico was unlike anything she'd ever seen: vast open spaces dotted with juniper and piñon, dramatic mesas rising in the distance, and a sky so wide and blue it made her feel both small and somehow free. Nathan proved to be good company, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the area. He was 32, she learned, and had come west from Ohio 10 years earlier. He'd worked as a ranch hand until saving enough to buy his own small spread 5 years ago. "Not the biggest operation," he admitted, "but it's mine, free and clear. 60 head of cattle, decent grazing land, and water rights to the creek that runs through the property." "That's impressive," Victoria said sincerely, "to build something from nothing in just a few years." Nathan shrugged, though she could tell her words pleased him. "What about you, Miss Reed? What brought you all the way from Connecticut to marry a stranger?" Victoria hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "Necessity, primarily. After my father died, I had few options. The tailor shop went to satisfy his debts, and while I could have continued working for the new owner, the wages were barely enough to rent a room." She smoothed her skirt. "When I saw Mr. Fletcher's advertisement seeking a bride, a woman of good character and practical skills, he specified it seemed a reasonable solution." "And now?" Nathan asked quietly. "Now I'm not certain," Victoria admitted. "I have enough saved for a train ticket back east, but what awaits me there? More of the same struggle, I suppose." Sarah, who had been quiet during much of the journey, leaned forward from her seat in the back of the wagon. "The West offers opportunities for women that the East doesn't," she said. "It's harder in some ways, yes, but there's more freedom too." Victoria considered this as they crested a small rise, bringing Nathan's ranch into view. The house itself was modest but solidly built, a one-story structure with a pitched roof and a small porch. Several outbuildings clustered nearby. A barn, what appeared to be a bunkhouse, and various sheds. It was simple but well-maintained, with none of the neglect Victoria had half expected. "Home," Nathan said, a note of pride in his voice as he guided the wagon into the yard. Inside, however, the house told a different story. While clean enough, it clearly reflected the dwelling of a man who spent most of his time working outdoors. The furniture was minimal and functional: a table with 4 mismatched chairs, a sagging sofa, a single bookshelf loaded with more practical items than books. The walls were bare save for a single painting of mountains that looked as though it had come with the house. "As you can see," Nathan said, running a hand through his hair in a gesture Victoria was beginning to recognize as a sign of mild embarrassment, "it needs some attention." "It has good bones," Victoria replied diplomatically, already mentally cataloging what might be done to make the space more comfortable. "How many rooms in total?" "4, Nathan said. "This main room, kitchen through there, and 2 bedrooms. The second one's barely used, just storage mostly." Victoria moved through the house, taking note of window sizes and furnishings that could benefit from slipcovers or cushions. The kitchen was surprisingly well equipped, though desperately in need of curtains to soften the harsh rectangle of light from its single window. "What exactly did you have in mind, Mr. Irwin?" she asked as they completed the tour. "Honestly, whatever you think would help," he said. "Curtains for sure. Proper bedding, the blankets I have are serviceable but rough. Maybe something for the walls, and the sofa needs something." Victoria smiled at his vague description. "I think I can help with all of that, though it will require quite a bit of fabric and materials." "Cost isn't a concern," Nathan assured her. "I've been saving for house improvements, just never got around to doing much about it." After taking careful measurements and notes, they shared a simple lunch that Nathan had prepared before their arrival: cold chicken, bread, and apples. As they ate, Victoria outlined her initial ideas and approximately how long the work would take. 4 weeks, perhaps 5, she estimated, depending on what materials are available in Rattan. "And you're willing to take on the job?" Nathan asked, a hopeful note in his voice. Victoria glanced at Sarah, who gave an almost imperceptible nod of approval. "Yes," Victoria decided. "I am." The return journey to town was filled with planning discussion. By the time they reached the boarding house, Victoria had a detailed list of fabrics and notions she would need, and Nathan had promised to accompany her to the general store the following day to purchase everything. That evening, alone in her room, Victoria reflected on the unexpected turn her life had taken. Just 2 days ago, she had been devastated by rejection, uncertain of her future. Now she had temporary employment, a place to stay, and perhaps most surprisingly, the beginnings of friendship with the Irwin siblings. It wasn't the life she had traveled west to find, but there was promise in it nonetheless. The next few weeks passed in a blur of industry. The general store in Rattan had a surprisingly good selection of fabrics, augmented by a fortuitous arrival of new stock from back east. Victoria established a workroom of sorts in the boarding house's small parlor, which Sarah was happy to let her use during the quiet daytime hours when most boarders were out. Nathan visited regularly, ostensibly to check on the progress of his home furnishings, but, Victoria suspected, also simply to talk. He brought her wildflowers, once a casual gesture, he claimed, but one that made her heart beat a little faster nonetheless. "Just saw them growing by the creek and thought you might like a bit of color in your workroom," he said, looking slightly abashed as he handed her the modest bouquet of blue and yellow blossoms. "They're lovely," Victoria said, burying her nose in the fragrant flowers. "Thank you." 3 weeks into the project, most of the curtains were complete, as were new coverings for the sofa and 2 comfortable chairs Nathan hadn't even owned when she started. Victoria had also designed and begun constructing a patchwork quilt for the master bedroom, using scraps of various fabrics to create a pattern of stars against a deep blue background. It was this quilt she was working on when the door to the boarding house parlor burst open without warning. Victoria looked up, expecting Sarah or perhaps Nathan, but instead found herself facing Bartholomew Fletcher. He looked much as he had the day of her arrival, thin-lipped and severe, with cold eyes that assessed her as one might appraise livestock. Victoria's needle stilled in her hand. "So this is where you've been hiding," he said without preamble. Victoria set aside her sewing with deliberate calm, though her heart was racing. "I haven't been hiding, Mr. Fletcher, and I don't believe we have anything further to discuss." Fletcher stepped further into the room, uninvited. "I've reconsidered," he announced, as though conferring a great favor. "You can still be my wife." Victoria stared at him in disbelief. "I beg your pardon. I've learned you've been working as a seamstress," he continued. "That's a useful skill. I'm willing to overlook your emotional nature if you're bringing practical value to the marriage." The audacity of the man struck Victoria momentarily speechless. When she found her voice, it was steadier than she would have expected. "Mr. Fletcher, you made your feelings perfectly clear upon my arrival. I have no interest in revisiting the possibility of marriage between us." Fletcher's expression darkened. "Don't be foolish. What else will you do? Go back east in shame? Try your luck with another advertisement?" "I'm offering you respectability." "You're offering me a position, not a marriage," Victoria corrected him, rising to her feet, "and I must decline." "You," Fletcher began, but was interrupted by the parlor door opening once more. "Everything all right in here, Victoria?" Nathan asked, his casual tone belied by the tension in his stance as he assessed the scene before him. Fletcher turned, his lips curling in derision. "And who might you be?" "Nathan Irwin," he replied evenly. "Friend of Miss Reed's." "Well, friend of Miss Reed's," Fletcher said mockingly, "this is a private conversation between a man and his fiancée." "Ex-fiancée," Victoria corrected firmly. "And as I've said, our conversation is concluded." Fletcher ignored her, focusing instead on Nathan. "I don't know what she's told you, but this woman agreed to marry me, traveled all this way to do so." "And yet I found her abandoned at the train station," Nathan replied, his voice deceptively mild. "Seems to me a man who do that has forfeited any claim." Fletcher's face flushed with anger. "This is none of your concern." "I'm making it my concern," Nathan said, stepping fully into the room. He wasn't a particularly large man, but there was something in his quiet confidence that made Fletcher take an involuntary step back. "Victoria," Nathan continued without taking his eyes off Fletcher, "would you like this man to leave?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I would." Nathan nodded. "You heard the lady, Mr. Fletcher," the man supplied stiffly. "Mr. Fletcher, I suggest you take your leave." For a moment, it seemed Fletcher might argue further, but something in Nathan's steady gaze apparently convinced him otherwise. With a last contemptuous look at Victoria, he turned on his heel and stalked out. When the front door slammed behind him, Victoria released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said softly. Nathan's expression gentled. "No need for thanks. Man's clearly a fool." He hesitated, then added, "You all right?" Victoria nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her skirt. "I am. Just surprised. I never expected to see him again." Nathan glanced toward the door. "Think he'll cause more trouble?" "I don't know," Victoria admitted. "He seemed quite determined." "I'll mention it to Sheriff Davis," Nathan decided. "Just so he's aware." He hesitated, then added, "And maybe I should escort you when you're out in town, at least for a while." The offer touched Victoria deeply. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose on your time." "No imposition," Nathan assured her, using the same words he'd spoken that first evening at the train station. "Besides, I need to be in town regularly to check on my investment." He gestured to the fabric and sewing materials spread around the parlor. Victoria smiled, grateful for his tact in framing the protection as a matter of business rather than charity. "In that case, I accept." True to his word, Nathan began accompanying Victoria on her errands around Raton. They walked to the general store together for additional supplies, stopped by Mrs. Holloway's dress shop, where Victoria had indeed secured some additional piecework to supplement her income, and even attended Sunday services at the small Methodist church on the edge of town. If anyone in Raton found their growing companionship noteworthy, they were discreet enough not to mention it in Victoria's hearing. Sarah, however, was less restrained. "My brother's taken quite a shine to you," she commented one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch, enjoying the cool evening air after a particularly warm day. Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks. "He's been very kind." "Kind," Sarah repeated, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "Nathan's kind to everyone, But he doesn't bring everyone wildflowers, nor does he polish his boots before coming to town for just anyone. I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Victoria said primly, though her heart gave a treacherous leap at Sarah's words. Of course not, Sarah agreed amicably. Just as I'm sure you don't spend extra time selecting your dress before he comes calling. Victoria couldn't suppress a laugh at being so thoroughly seen through. Is it that obvious? Only to someone paying attention, Sarah assured her. She hesitated, then added more seriously. Nathan's a good man, Victoria, the best I know. He doesn't show his feelings easily, but when he gives his heart, it's completely. We're friends and business associates, Victoria protested weakly. Sarah just raised an eyebrow. If you say so. 4 days later, Victoria's work for Nathan was nearly complete. The curtains had been hung, the sofa and chairs recovered, and the quilt only needed its final binding. Nathan had invited both Victoria and Sarah to join him for dinner at the ranch to see the transformed house in its entirety. As they rode out in Nathan's wagon, Victoria found herself unaccountably nervous. She had worked diligently on each piece, selecting fabrics and designs she thought would suit both the house and its owner, but now she worried whether her choices would truly please him. "Stop fretting," Sarah murmured, noticing Victoria's restless hand smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her skirt. "Nathan will love everything because you made it." Victoria gave her a grateful smile but couldn't quite banish her anxiety. The ranch came into view, just as the late afternoon sun was casting a golden glow across the landscape. As they pulled into the yard, Victoria noticed several improvements since her last visit. The porch had been swept and adorned with 2 newly constructed rocking chairs, and a small flower bed had been established near the front steps. "You've been busy," she observed as Nathan helped her down from the wagon. "Seemed only right with all the work you've put into the inside," he replied with a smile. "Ready to see," Victoria nodded, suddenly eager despite her nerves. The transformation of Nathan's home was even more striking than Victoria had anticipated. The curtains she'd made from sturdy but attractive checked fabric softened the harsh lines of the windows and filtered the sunlight into a warm glow. The recovered sofa and chairs created a cozy seating area before the fireplace, while the new cushions added splashes of color to the previously stark room. Nathan walked slowly through the house, taking in each detail with evident appreciation. "Victoria," he said finally, turning to face her, "it's perfect, better than I could have imagined." The genuine pleasure in his voice eased Victoria's remaining anxiety. "I'm so glad you approve." "Approve? It's transformed. It feels like a home now, not just a place to sleep between work days." Sarah, who had been conducting her own inspection, rejoined them with a satisfied nod. "She's done wonders, Nathan, though I notice the second bedroom remains untouched." Nathan's ears reddened slightly. "That's for another time, perhaps." Victoria, sensing some undercurrent she didn't quite understand, moved the conversation along by suggesting they see how the kitchen curtains looked in the evening light. Dinner was a pleasant affair, a hearty stew Nathan had prepared himself, accompanied by fresh bread he'd purchased in town and brought out specially for the occasion. They ate at the newly adorned dining table, with a simple centerpiece of wildflowers Victoria recognized as being from the same meadow as those Nathan had brought her weeks earlier. After the meal, Sarah made a show of being tired and retreated to the second bedroom, which, despite Nathan's description of it as storage, had clearly been prepared for a guest. This left Victoria and Nathan alone on the porch, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening twilight. "Thank you," Nathan said after a comfortable silence. "Not just for the work on the house, but for bringing life to it, I suppose." Victoria smiled, warmed by his words. It was my pleasure. I've enjoyed the project immensely. And now that it's done, Nathan asked, his voice carefully neutral. What's next for you, Victoria? It was a question she'd been asking herself with increasing frequency as the work neared completion. I'm not entirely certain, she admitted. Mrs. Holloway has offered me regular work at her shop, though not full-time just yet. Nathan nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. So you're staying in Rattan then? For now, Victoria said. It feels right somehow, despite the inauspicious beginning. Nathan seemed to gather himself, turning to face her directly. I'm glad, he said simply. Then, after a moment's hesitation, Victoria, I know we haven't known each other long, but these past weeks, well, they've meant a great deal to me. Victoria's heart quickened. They've meant a great deal to me as well, Nathan. Encouraged, he continued. I don't have much to offer, just this small ranch and a life that's often hard work. But it's a good life, I think. Or it could be, with the right person to share it. Victoria scarcely dared breathe, afraid to hope for what his words seemed to be suggesting. What I'm trying to say, poorly, Nathan went on, is that I care for you, Victoria, more than I expected to and sooner than might be sensible. And if you might someday consider, that is, if you could see yourself. Nathan, Victoria interrupted gently, her heart full to bursting. Are you asking me to court you? The relief on his face was almost comical. Yes, that's exactly what I'm asking, only far more eloquently than I was managing. Victoria couldn't help but laugh, joy bubbling up inside her. Then my answer is yes. I would be very happy to court you, Nathan Irwin. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. May I? He began, then seemed to think better of it. May you what? Victoria prompted, suddenly bold. May I kiss you? He asked simply. In answer, Victoria leaned forward slightly, invitation enough for Nathan, who closed the distance between them with gentle determination. His lips were warm against hers, the kiss both tender and promising. When they parted, Nathan kept hold of her hand, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm. I should warn you, he said, his voice husky, I'm not looking for a lengthy courtship. Once I make up my mind about something, I tend to move forward decidedly. Is that so? Victoria teased, though her pulse raced at his implications. And have you made up your mind about me, Mr. Irwin? I have indeed, Miss Reed, he replied without hesitation. The moment I saw you at that train station, trying so hard to be brave despite everything, I knew there was something special about you. Victoria's eyes misted at the memory. I was a mess that day. You were human, Nathan corrected gently. And perfect, tears and all. From inside the house came the sound of a door opening, followed by Sarah's voice calling out with exaggerated casualness. Is it safe to rejoin you two, or should I make myself scarce a while longer? Nathan laughed, the sound rich and uninhibited in a way Victoria hadn't heard before. Come on out, Sarah. We're decent. Sarah appeared in the doorway, a knowing smile on her face as she took in their clasped hands. Well now, she said, satisfaction evident in her tone. This is a development I heartily approve of. The ride back to town that night was filled with conversation and laughter, a sense of possibilities unfurling before them like the starlit road ahead. Victoria found herself looking forward rather than back for the first time since her father's death, not with anxiety about an uncertain future, but with hope for what might come. Over the next 2 months, Nathan courted Victoria with attentive determination. He brought her not just wildflowers now, but also small, thoughtful gifts, a carved wooden thimble holder for her sewing basket, a book of poetry he'd ordered specially from Denver, a locket containing a tiny pressed flower from the meadow near his ranch. Victoria, for her part, continued to add touches to his home, embroidered pillows for the rocking chairs, a braided rug for beside the bed, curtain ties fashioned from twisted cord in colors that complemented the rest of the decor. Each item was an expression of growing affection, a way of weaving herself into the fabric of Nathan's life. They were walking along Raton's Main Street one warm July afternoon when they encountered Bartholomew Fletcher coming out of the bank. Victoria tensed, but Nathan's hand at her elbow steadied her. Fletcher's gaze swept over them, his lips curling in familiar disdain. "Well, well," he drawled, "if it isn't the weeping woman and her champion." Nathan's expression remained neutral, though Victoria felt him stiffen beside her. "Mr. Fletcher," he acknowledged with minimal courtesy, "if you'll excuse us. Found yourself a more accommodating situation, did you?" Fletcher directed his words to Victoria, ignoring Nathan entirely. "Though I hear it's a modest spread at best, you could have had a proper home with me." "I believe the lady made her choice clear," Nathan said, his voice deceptively mild. "And we'd appreciate being on our way." Fletcher stepped closer, his face flushing with what Victoria recognized as wounded pride disguised as anger. "I hope he knows what he's getting, a woman too weak for frontier life, crying at shadows." Before Nathan could respond, Victoria found her own voice. "Mr. Fletcher," she said clearly, "I may have shed tears that day at the station, but they weren't from weakness. They were from exhaustion after a journey I undertook with courage and determination, only to be met with immediate rejection from a man who showed neither kindness nor basic human decency." She drew herself up to her full height, meeting his gaze squarely. "I've since learned that real strength isn't an absence of emotion but the willingness to face life honestly, with an open heart. Something you, sir, seem incapable of understanding." Fletcher appeared momentarily taken aback by her direct address. He recovered quickly, but the brief flash of uncertainty in his eyes gave Victoria a quiet satisfaction. "Come along, Nathan," she said, taking his arm firmly. "We have more pleasant appointments to keep." As they walked away, leaving Fletcher standing rigid with indignation, Nathan squeezed her hand where it rested in the crook of his elbow. "That," he said with undisguised admiration, "was magnificent." Victoria laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "It felt rather magnificent, I must say." "Have dinner with me tonight," Nathan said suddenly. "Not at the boarding house or the cafe out at the ranch, just us." There was something in his tone that made Victoria's heart skip. "I'd like that," she agreed. That evening, Nathan arrived at the boarding house with his wagon freshly washed and a bouquet of store-bought roses rather than his usual wildflowers. He had clearly made an effort with his appearance, as well. His hair was neatly trimmed, his shirt crisp, and Victoria detected the faint scent of bay rum as he helped her up into the wagon seat. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon as they reached the ranch, painting the landscape in warm, amber hues. Victoria noticed with pleasure that the flower bed she'd helped Nathan plant near the porch steps was flourishing, adding cheerful color to the approach. Inside, the table had been set with care, a clean cloth covering the surface, the dishes arranged precisely, even a pair of candles ready to be lit as the daylight faded. A delicious aroma wafted from the kitchen. "Something smells wonderful," Victoria commented as Nathan helped her remove her light shawl. "Beef roast," he replied with a hint of pride, "with potatoes and carrots from Mrs. Thornton's garden. She gave me her recipe, though I can't promise I've done it justice." The meal proved delicious, and the conversation flowed easily between them as it always did. Yet Victoria sensed a current of anticipation running beneath Nathan's outward calm. He seemed to choose his words with particular care, and once or twice she caught him watching her with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. After they had finished eating and cleared away the dishes together, Nathan suggested they sit on the porch to enjoy the sunset. The evening was perfect for it, warm without being hot, with just enough breeze to keep the air pleasant. They settled into the rocking chairs Victoria had adorned with cushions, the familiar creak of the wooden slats beneath them, a soothing counterpoint to the chorus of crickets beginning their nightly serenade. "I've been thinking," Nathan said after they had sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the sky shift through deepening shades of orange and purple. "A dangerous pastime," Victoria teased gently. He smiled but continued with obvious intent. "I've been thinking about what makes a home. For years, I thought it was just having a roof over my head that was mine, free and clear. A place where I made the decisions and answered to no one but myself." Victoria listened, sensing the importance of what he was trying to express. "Then you came along," Nathan continued, his voice softening. "And suddenly this place wasn't quite enough anymore. The walls were bare, the furniture serviceable but not comfortable, the windows stark. I saw it through your eyes, and I realized what was missing wasn't curtains or cushions, though those have made a fine difference." He turned to face her fully now. What was missing was someone to share it with. Someone who sees the beauty in small things, who brings warmth and life with her very presence. Victoria's heart began to race as Nathan rose from his chair and, to her astonishment, lowered himself to one knee before her. "Victoria Reid," he said, taking her hands in his, "I know it hasn't been long and maybe this is too soon by proper Eastern standards. But out here, life moves at its own pace and my heart tells me this is right. I love you, your strength, your kindness, your tears and your smiles. I love the way you've transformed not just my house but my entire life." From his pocket, he withdrew a small box, opening it to reveal a simple gold band set with a modest diamond that caught the last rays of the setting sun. "Will you marry me? Make this house truly a home and build a life with me?" Victoria felt tears well in her eyes, but for once she made no attempt to hide them. These were tears of joy, and she would never again be ashamed of showing her emotions. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Nathan. I will marry you." His face broke into a smile of such unrestrained happiness that Victoria felt her own joy multiply tenfold. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, then rose to gather her into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that held all the promise of the future they would build together. The wedding took place in early September, when the summer heat had begun to ease, but before the first chill of autumn descended on northern New Mexico. They were married in the small Methodist church in Raton, with Sarah standing as Victoria's matron of honor and Nathan's foreman, Michael Daniels, serving as best man. Victoria wore a dress of ivory silk she had sewn herself, with delicate embroidery at the collar, and cuffs, a labor of love that had occupied her evening hours for weeks. Nathan, looking handsome and slightly overwhelmed in a new black suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the short aisle on the arm of Sheriff Davis, who had graciously agreed to give her away. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, their vows spoken clearly before the assembled well-wishers, a mix of Nathan's ranch hands, boarding house residents, and townspeople who had come to know and respect the couple during Victoria's months in Raton. The celebration afterward was held at Nathan's ranch, their ranch, now with tables set up in the yard and lanterns strung from tree to tree. There was music from a fiddler and banjo player from town, dancing on a wooden platform Nathan and his men had constructed specially for the occasion, and food enough to feed twice the number of guests. As the evening progressed, Victoria found a moment of quiet with her new husband, standing slightly apart from the festivities to take in the scene before them. "Happy, Mrs. Irwin?" Nathan asked, his arm warm around her waist. "Completely," Victoria replied, leaning into his embrace. "And you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple. From across the yard, Victoria caught sight of Sarah watching them with evident satisfaction. She raised her glass in a small toast when she noticed Victoria's gaze, then turned to continue her conversation with the surprisingly attentive Michael Daniels. "Your sister seems to be enjoying herself," Victoria observed with a smile. Nathan followed her gaze and chuckled. "Mike's been sweet on Sarah for years, though he'd never admit it. Too intimidated by her, I think. She could do worse than a hard-working foreman," Victoria mused, "and this is clearly a propitious season for romance." The party continued until well after dark, but eventually the guests departed, leaving the newlyweds alone in their home. As Nathan closed and locked the door behind the last well-wisher, Victoria felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with an unexpected shyness. Nathan seemed to sense her sudden uncertainty. He approached her slowly, taking both her hands in his. "I meant what I said in my vows today," he told her softly, "to cherish and protect, to respect and honor, always." Victoria's momentary nervousness melted away under the warmth of his gaze. "And I meant every word of mine," she replied, "to love and support in good times and difficult ones, always." That night, they truly became husband and wife in every sense, discovering each other with tenderness and growing passion. Victoria found in Nathan's arms belonging she had never known before, a sense of coming home that had nothing to do with the physical structure around them, and everything to do with the bond they had forged. In the quiet aftermath, lying together in the bed now adorned with the star quilt Victoria had completed as one of her first projects, Nathan traced gentle fingers along her cheek. "You're crying," he observed softly, catching a tear with his thumb. Victoria hadn't even realized, but she smiled through the moisture in her eyes. "Happy tears," she assured him. "Very happy ones." "Good," Nathan murmured, gathering her closer, "because I intend to spend the rest of my life giving you reasons for that kind of tears." The seasons turned, and with them, Victoria and Nathan settled into the rhythm of married life. There were adjustments, of course, Victoria learning the patterns of ranch life, Nathan becoming accustomed to sharing his space and decisions with a partner. But they navigated each challenge together, their bond strengthening with each passing month. Victoria continued her sewing work, taking commissions from townspeople who had admired her skill with needle and thread. She converted the former storage bedroom into a proper sewing room. With good light from the east-facing windows and shelves, Nathan built to hold her growing collection of fabrics and notions. By spring, Victoria had news that brought fresh joy to their household. She was expecting their first child, due in late autumn. Nathan's reaction to the announcement was everything she could have hoped for: stunned disbelief, followed by such exuberant celebration that he lifted her off her feet, spinning her around before hastily setting her down again with apologies for his exuberance. "A baby," he kept saying, as if testing the reality of the words. "Our baby." The pregnancy progressed well, with Victoria remaining active and healthy throughout the summer months. She and Nathan spent evening hours discussing names, making plans for the nursery, and imagining their child's future. Sarah, who had indeed begun a courtship with foreman Michael Daniels, visited often from town, bringing gifts for the coming baby and practical advice from her experience running the boarding house, where she had helped several expectant mothers over the years. In early October, with Victoria nearing her time, they were surprised by an unexpected visitor. Bartholomew Fletcher appeared at their door one afternoon, hat in hand, and an uncomfortable expression on his face. Nathan answered the door, his posture immediately stiffening upon recognizing their caller. "Mr. Fletcher," he said coldly. "What brings you here?" Fletcher cleared his throat. "I've come to speak with both of you, if I may." After a moment's hesitation and a questioning glance at Victoria, who nodded her assent from where she sat by the fire, Nathan reluctantly stepped aside to allow the man entry. Fletcher remained standing, declining Nathan's perfunctory offer of a seat. His gaze took in the comfortable room, lingering briefly on Victoria's obviously pregnant form before returning to focus somewhere between the couple. "I'll be direct," he said stiffly. "I'm leaving the territory, moving to California. Before I go, I wanted to—" He seemed to struggle with the words, to offer an apology of sorts. Victoria exchanged a surprised glance with Nathan, who moved to stand protectively near her chair. "Go on," Nathan said, his tone neutral. Fletcher shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "My behavior upon your arrival, misread Mrs. Irwin, that is, was ungentlemanly. And our subsequent encounter in town was equally regrettable." He looked directly at Victoria now. "The truth is, I was raised to believe that emotional displays indicated weakness, particularly in women. My mother was a stern woman who never shed a tear, even at my father's funeral. I expected the same from a wife." Victoria nodded slowly, beginning to understand. "And now I recognize that my expectations were unrealistic," Fletcher admitted, "and perhaps harmful. I've had occasion to reconsider many of my beliefs these past months, due to circumstances I won't trouble you with." "I appreciate your apology, Mr. Fletcher," Victoria said with quiet dignity. "And I wish you well in California." Fletcher nodded, then turned to Nathan. "You were right about her strength, Irwin. I was too blind to see it." "Yes, you were," Nathan agreed simply. With nothing more to say, Fletcher took his leave, declining their polite offer of refreshment before his journey back to town. When the door closed behind him, Nathan turned to Victoria with raised eyebrows. "Well," he said, "that was unexpected." Victoria smiled thoughtfully. "People can surprise you, sometimes they even surprise themselves." 2 weeks later, after a labor that lasted through one long night and into the following morning, Victoria gave birth to a healthy son they named James Nathan Irwin. He had his father's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair that made Nathan beam with pride. As Victoria held their son in the quiet of their bedroom, Nathan sat beside them on the edge of the bed, his expression a mixture of awe and overwhelming love. "He's perfect," Nathan whispered, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. "You're perfect, both of you." Victoria smiled tiredly up at her husband, tears of joy and exhaustion mingling on her cheeks. Nathan wiped them away tenderly, then leaned down to kiss her forehead. "Thank you," he murmured against her skin, "for our son, for our home, for showing me what it means to live with an open heart." Victoria shifted slightly to make room for him beside her on the bed. Nathan carefully settled next to her, one arm around her shoulders, the other helping to cradle their son between them. "You remember what you said to me that first day at the train station?" Victoria asked softly. "When I was trying so hard not to cry," Nathan smiled. "That tears mean you're human." "Yes," Victoria said, looking down at their sleeping child. "And it's one of the most important lessons I want to teach our son, that feeling deeply isn't weakness but strength. That being fully human means embracing joy and sorrow, triumph and disappointment, all as part of one beautiful life. We'll teach him together," Nathan promised, "and any brothers or sisters who might come along." Victoria laughed softly. "One child at a time, Mr. Irwin. Let's master this adventure before beginning another." But as she spoke, She knew in her heart that their family would indeed grow in the years to come. The home they had built together, both the physical structure and the bonds of love between them, had room enough for all the joy and tears that life would bring. As winter settled over northern New Mexico, bringing short days and long, cozy evenings by the fire, the Irwin household established new rhythms around the needs of their infant son. Victoria discovered an unexpected talent for motherhood, approaching it with the same blend of practicality and tenderness she brought to everything else in her life. Nathan proved to be an attentive and involved father, often carrying James in a sling across his chest while he handled the less strenuous ranch chores. The sight of her tall, strong husband cradling their tiny son with such gentle care never failed to fill Victoria's heart with renewed love. Spring arrived with its promise of renewal, bringing wildflowers to the meadows and new calves to the herd. As the days lengthened and warmed, Victoria began taking James outside for short periods, letting him feel the sunshine on his face, and showing him the colorful blooms in the garden she had expanded considerably since her arrival. "He's going to be walking before we know it," Nathan observed one evening as they watched 7-month-old James determinedly pulling himself up to standing using the edge of a chair. "And talking," Victoria agreed with a smile. "He already babbles constantly, just like his father." Nathan laughed, accepting the gentle teasing with good humor. "Can't argue with that. Irwin men have plenty to say, don't we, son?" James responded with an enthusiastic string of nonsense syllables that had both his parents laughing. As their first wedding anniversary approached, Nathan began disappearing into the workshop behind the barn for hours at a time, refusing to tell Victoria what he was working on despite her curious inquiries. "You'll see soon enough," was all he would say, a secretive smile playing at his lips. On the morning of their anniversary, Nathan presented Victoria with his creation, a beautiful rocking cradle crafted from polished pine, with intricate carvings of stars along the sides that matched the pattern of her quilt. "Nathan," Victoria breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "It's exquisite. For James now," he said, "and perhaps for another little one someday when the time is right." Victoria's eyes met his, a silent communication passing between them. "Perhaps sooner than you think," she said softly. Nathan's expression shifted from contentment to dawning comprehension. "Victoria, are you saying?" She nodded, her smile widening at his reaction. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday. We'll welcome another child in early spring." Nathan whooped with joy, gathering her carefully into his arms. "2 babies less than 2 years apart," he marveled. "We'll have our hands full." "And our hearts," Victoria added. "Our very full hearts." Their second child, a daughter they named Emily Sarah, arrived in March of 1887, completing their family in a way they hadn't known was missing. Where James was active and vocal from his earliest days, Emily was observant and thoughtful, watching the world with serious eyes before breaking into smiles that could light the darkest room. Life settled into a pattern of productive days and peaceful nights, the challenges of ranching and child rearing balanced by the deep satisfaction of building something meaningful together. Victoria and Nathan weathered the inevitable storms, both literal ones that sometimes threatened the ranch and figurative ones that tested their partnership, with a resilience born of mutual respect and unwavering love. 5 years after Victoria's inauspicious arrival in Raton, she stood on the porch of their home, watching Nathan teach 3-year-old Emily to ride her first pony, while 5-year-old James offered enthusiastic advice from atop his own slightly larger mount. The ranch had prospered under their joint care, expanding to include better grazing land, and a small orchard Victoria had insisted would thrive despite Nathan's initial skepticism. Sarah and Michael, now married with a young son of their own, had moved from town to a small house Nathan had helped them build on the northern edge of the ranch property. The arrangement allowed the sisters-in-law to assist each other with child care and household tasks, while the men worked together to manage the growing operation. As Victoria observed her family, the family she had traveled west hoping to find, but had instead built through unexpected circumstances and genuine love, she felt the familiar warmth of tears threatening. These were the good tears, the ones that came from a heart so full it couldn't contain all its joy. Nathan looked up, catching her eye across the yard. Even after years together, the connection between them remained as strong as ever, a silent understanding that needed no words. He smiled, seeing the emotion on her face, and gave a small nod that said everything. "I see you. I love you. I'm grateful for every moment." Victoria wiped the tear that had escaped down her cheek and smiled back, unashamed of her emotion. She had long since learned the wisdom of Nathan's first words to her tears truly did mean you were human, fully engaged with life's joys and sorrows, holding nothing back. And in the end, it was that capacity for deep feeling, the very quality Bartholomew Fletcher had rejected, that had led her to this rich, full life with a man who cherished rather than condemned her emotional nature. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in colors no artist could fully capture, Victoria descended the porch steps to join her family in the yard. Nathan reached out as she approached, drawing her to his side with the easy familiarity of long-established love. "Happy?" he asked quietly, his arm warm around her waist. Victoria leaned into his embrace, watching their children's delighted faces as they mastered new skills under their father's patient guidance. "Completely," she replied, "in every way that matters." And as night fell over their ranch, stars emerging one by one in the vast New Mexico sky, the Irwin family gathered in the home they had created together, a place of warmth and acceptance, of laughter and, yes, occasional tears. A place where every emotion was honored as part of the beautiful complexity of being fully, authentically human.